Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War news update, first part thereof for the 10th of November 2023. Let's go to where we normally start, Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveat supply, of course, propaganda, inaccuracies, etc. Don't have Russian figures of Ukrainian loss. Well, we have some Russian claims that are so ridiculous that they don't warrant being talked about. Anyway, all the caveats can be found in the description to the video below. Let's go to what the Ukrainians claim of personnel. 800 troops lost the day before. That is a large number. We saw over 1,000, was it yesterday? That is ticking up and down, but in the upper reaches of the range that we've seen since the beginning of the counter-offensive. 1 tank, 3 armoured personnel vehicles and 14 artillery systems are dropping right back down, and this could be as a result of weather. We don't know. We know that, well, we don't know. We understand that the Russians are taking heavy infantry losses in places like Avdiivka still. Talk about them losing 500 people a day, and that could be responsible for much of the personnel losses that we can see there. And there are also claims that the Russians are not using as much mechanized equipment in those particular areas. But as I say, it might also be to do with the weather. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 2 drones and 1 cruise missile. It was a very quiet night 2 nights ago. Last night, again, fairly quiet as well. But those are usually 1 day in arrears, those figures. 23 vehicles and fuel tanks, so quite a lot of logistical vehicles, no doubt being hit by the Ukrainians still, and 1 piece of special equipment. So across many of the categories, much lower, but still representing an active front line, given that 800 personnel have been taken out. Now, when we go to Andrew Perpetua's list of equipment lost, and he's the mapper that I refer a lot to, he does a great job of taking in all of the social media feeds that he looks at and counting up the equipment losses for both sides. He's heavily skews to looking at Russian sources so that he gets as fair an understanding of Ukrainian losses as he can. And at the moment, we are seeing, apart from a few days here and there that have parity in the losses between the Ukrainians and Russians, there is usually a ratio advantage to the Ukrainians. And here we can see probably a 3-to-1 loss ratio of Russian losses to Ukrainian losses. Let's go and check out what we can see. We're going to start with the Ukrainians. I usually start with the Ukrainians at the moment. So here we have self-propelled gun. Don't know what it is. Damaged, and a D-20 howitzer, so a couple of bits of artillery, Bradley, a few older BMPs, infantry fighting vehicles, but nothing particularly bad there. There is a Zu-23-2, I think that's an autocannon on the back of a Ural truck, so as far as an air defense system that's lost, that's going to be your very lowest value piece of kit. So what we'd expect, there's 1 tank there, don't know what it is, it's an unknown sort of tank, too difficult to identify. If we look at the Russian losses, there's an electronic warfare system, that is a high value system, we'll talk about that in a second. And in fact, it appears that there's 2 of those that have been lost as well. Some tanks there, bit of a spread of tanks, same with the infantry fighting vehicles and a whole bunch of trucks and civilian vehicles. Again, when you look at the claims from the General Staff for 23 in that category, lost vehicles and fuel tanks, you can see here that most of those are accounted for in Andrew's list here. But yeah, quite a few bits and pieces. You got 5 tanks there. Only 1 tank claimed yesterday, but of course the footage will be from this last sort of week. I think generally, if he finds the footage is really old, he doesn't include it in the list. I think there is a cutoff. I have to speak to him about that. But the point here is that the Russians have lost an awful lot more kit than the Ukrainians, and the value of that kit is arguably higher as well. At least, when it comes to we'll come to that electronic warfare kit in a minute. Just in general, Jay in Kyiv says the amount of destroyed Russian equipment videos right now is absolutely insane, and I'd have to agree. There's a real spike in footage now coming out of particularly Russian equipment losses. Just huge numbers of kit, huge numbers of pieces of kit being taken out. He says, it's never been like this. From just the channels I monitor, it's around 100 a day right now. Samples just from the past hour or so, and he gives a bunch of pieces of video footage there. If you're 100 a day, I mean, we are seeing a much quieter day today in terms of the mechanized equipment lost, 1, 3, 14, 23. But on other days where it's been well over 100 bits of kit lost, and if Jay in Kiev is saying, yeah, and I often see 100 pieces of video feed, I mean, it's going to be things like dugouts being hit and troop accumulations too, so it's not just going to be equipment. But, you can build up a picture that supports the general trends with what the Ukrainian general staff are saying. Now, to add to that, there's a 20-minute video. I'm not going to show it to you. It's not all the stuff getting blown up. It's Magyar talking about different things. In fact, you get to see a flock of birds at one point. But here's a 20-minute video that you can find in the description below of Robert Magyar. So he's a guy that's in charge of that very famous unit of, is it here Magyar's Eagles or Magyar's Birds or whatever, but the drone unit that takes out an awful lot of stuff, and he's moved to different places along the front line. It seems to be working in Kherson at the moment, and probably because that's where they're trying to bring all these bits of combined arms warfare together in order to get a continued momentum going and advantage across the Dnipro River. But he's responsible for taking out a lot of stuff, it seems, and there is a lot of stuff that has been taken out along the Dnipro River. The Ukrainian drone operators are incredibly busy, where the Russian ones are getting jammed, it appears, from successful countermeasures and electronic warfare from the Ukrainians. But anyway, 20 minutes of video here of Magyar screwing up the Russians on the left bank of Kherson. Impressive work. There's even a traffic jam of destroyed equipment on one of the roads. Clearly, it is, if not a test bed, the implementation of General Zaluzhny's white paper on how to break positional warfare. But what you're seeing in Kherson is very much in line with what General Zaluzhny said in his essay, and I talked to you about it. I read parts of it to you about how to break this positional warfare kind of stalemate that is either happening or potentially happening. And what you're seeing in Kherson is the implementation of things like really serious countermeasures being put in place, electronic warfare, to stop the Russians getting drones in the air and therefore spotting for their artillery. So they can't use counter battery, they can't acquire as many targets for either for the drones themselves or for, as I say, for artillery. And they are relying predominantly on aerial aviation, dropping guided glide bombs right across the length of the river there. So I think the Ukrainians are trying really hard to bring all these threads together in that particular region. This morning, says now reports, units of the 58th Motorized Infantry Brigade destroyed 2 RB301B Borisoglepsk 2 automated electronic warfare systems. So we saw Andrew Perpetua talking about 1 being taken out there. Here, the claim is 2. It is designed to suppress satellite communication systems and radio navigation systems. So again, it's this electronic warfare. It's providing your own electronic warfare equipment to suppress the enemy, but then destroying your enemy's versions of that as well. And the cost of this complex is estimated at $200 million. That's insanely expensive. I presume that is just one of them, but it might be 200 million for both. I don't know. Reported destruction there. That's been geolocated. Claim is 2, but I don't know that imagery is provided for both. Nonetheless, that is, I think, a significant hit for the Ukrainians there. Now, the RDK, these are the Russian volunteers operating in the north of Ukraine on behalf of the Ukrainians, have attacked a Russian convoy in Bryansk. A video will be released soon, they say. Well, slightly more information has come out since that initial claim. As Dennis points, says Dmitry from War Translators, someone fired at a vehicle in the Bryansk People's Republic and killed an FSB Lieutenant Colonel yesterday. Meanwhile, the following cryptic message appears on the RDK, Russian Volunteer Corps, channel along with the photos. Quote, while a charity auction was going on in Vilnius, the RDK, I don't know what that refers to, the RDK Sabotage and Reconnaissance Group was moving forward its goal and successfully ambushed enemy transport in the Bryansk region. A video of the objective control will be posted later, but you have some pictures there. It looks like some ATGMs being utilized against something in Russian territory. And in occupied territory, Mariupol, there appears to be an explosion. I don't know anything about this other than the implication here. Someone from the occupiers was blown up in Mariupol, says Max23. The implication that it is a possible assassination attempt, maybe a car bomb or something like that in Mariupol. There's a large-scale fire in Moscow at the moment, big old fire in that area. Reported by local channels. According to preliminary data, the warehouses of a company, Gazdevais, producing gas meters, is burning. The current fire is 2,000 square meters, so a pretty sizable one. But equally, in Ukraine, there's a massive fire reported yesterday in Vinnytsia. The fire occurred in in a warehouse where laminate flooring is stored, about 1,000 square meters, actually, so half the size of the other one. Quote, emergency workers are doing everything possible to prevent the flames from spreading to nearby metal hangars. So I don't know what the cause of that was, whether it's a strike, whether it's just a fire. If it's just a fire, I mean, these things happen. It's just normal everyday life, I guess. I report them in Russia because they happen so often, and it appears to be part of a pattern. But just to report that sometimes this happens in Ukraine as well, of course. Moving on to strikes. Overnight, 5 out of 6 Shahed drones were shot down, and a single KH-59 was shot down. In addition, a KH-31 was launched, but there's no information on the consequences of that missile. So there might have been a target that was hit last night by one such missile. Okay, what else are we hearing? Well, quote, preparations are currently underway for a whole series of operations similar to the events in Kerch, that being the hit on the ship in Kerch, in the shipbuilding yard. There are still enough caliber carriers in the Black Sea Fleet, and there will be more news in the future, GRU representative Andriy Yusov has said. So they are often cryptic like this, but sometimes I wonder why you say this, because it's just telegraphing what you're going to do, but I guess it just gives the Russians the jitters, and it's all about keeping them on edge. I don't know why you announce this stuff. However, Russian Ministry of Defense last night reported a drone attack in Crimea. 2 drones were allegedly destroyed. Russian channels write about the arrival on a location with barracks in Chornomorsk. Now, I don't know if this is actually the hit on 2 landing craft that we're just about to hear about, or a separate hit with aerial drones, because that can be interpreted in many ways. And of course, we have unmanned sea vehicles. Well, military intelligence has said that Ukraine has hit 2 Russian light landing craft in Crimea. Ukrainian strike on occupied Crimea overnight on the 10th hit 2 light landing crafts. These are in Chornomorsk, so that sounds like it's the same place. Rather than barracks, it's probably these 2 boats that were hit. So 2 Russian high-speed amphibious boats were hit in the village of Chornomorsk. The operation was carried out by the GUR. So this apparently refers to Cerner-class landing craft, so Project 11770. That's what they look like. They can carry the odd bit of equipment and some troops on board. So they're not like the biggest craft. There is footage now released concerning this. So Ukrainian GUR released footage of naval drones hitting 2 Russian Project 11770 Cerner-class landing craft, and the ships were reportedly carrying infantry armored vehicles such as BTR-82s and an air defense system. I can't vouch for any of that, but this is what the footage looks like. I couldn't work out how big the ships were until I sort of Googled what ships they were, because it's not quite clear from this video footage. We have seagulls sitting in the water, suddenly flying out of the way as these hit. So I think that's pretty much the length of the boat there. They're not huge boats, and you can see the other drone there catching the explosion of the first one, and I presume this drone then goes off and hits a different boat, but it's unclear as to what what happened there. You can see it moves into something, but quite what's going on. And then from a distance, you can see further explosions. So I don't know if that means there was a third drone operating out there as well. Anyway, that is a claim. A few more details here. What do they say? Damaged Russian vessels are capable of carrying 45 metric tons worth of cargo, and 92 armed troops were reportedly holding cargo and armed vehicles. They can also be equipped with Tor M2 air defense systems, which would allow Russia to protect its Black Sea fleet amid growing Ukrainian attacks. So that's not to say they were carrying those things, but they can carry those things. Who knows what was actually taken out? But that is, again, a significant blow to the Russians, and will keep them... Well, it almost certainly will change the Russians' behavior and will get them to pull out even more equipment from Crimea, I would assume, and back to Russia. There are explosions in Sevastopol as well. More surprises are planned, according to the Ukrainians. And I presume those are different explosions to what we've just been learning about. So Crimea being the center of attention for the Ukrainians, but also the Ukrainians saying that more is to come. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. This is the first underground school being built in the village of Korotych in the Kharkiv region. So this is obviously somewhere that is routinely hammered by Russian shelling and S-300 missiles, and even cluster munitions earlier on in the war. Anyway, the head of regional military administration has announced that this school will have several rooms, sanitary rooms, 3 exits, and will be equipped with an autonomous source of electricity, and will be able to withstand a direct hit from an S-300 and other missiles. So you can see the extent to which the Ukrainians are having to go in certain regions to keep their children safe, to keep the civil infrastructure up and running. Okay, quote, the current situation on the battlefield does not indicate that Ukraine can gain military superiority, and time is now in Russia's favor. The situation is clearly not positive. What should be positive for Ukraine is that we are on their side and should keep supporting them in achieving their goals. This is Czech President Petr Pavel saying at a diplomacy and security conference. Now, he is a massive supporter of Ukraine, and he is saying that things are tough for Ukraine here. They don't have the momentum, and time is on Russia's side. So this idea that Russia has the greater ability to just keep grinding on for a much longer time period than the Ukrainians, and that might be dependent or that might be concerning international aid for Ukraine and war fatigue, whereas Russia is kind of doing this on their own and they aren't relying so much on international aid. But when they are relying on it, those partners aren't particularly susceptible to fatigue and to public dissent, because it's Iran, it's North Korea, it's China, it's Burma, right? These sort of places are wholly different countries. And so when it comes to democratic nations like the US that are answerable to their electorate, taxpayers and whatnot, then people get a bit more jittery in such long-term support. I'm going to be speaking later to Tim White, doing a live chat in about 3 hours, so please check that out. One thing I'm going to talk about is this idea. Sorry, something's just come up. Right, I'm back with you. The idea that we are in this for the long haul, but we've done that before. Like, if you look at the Cold War and the amount of money that the US, for example, spanked on the Cold War in indirectly fighting the USSR. And here we have a situation where Ukraine are doing the direct fighting against the new iteration of the USSR. And again, it comes back to this argument about return on investment. For less than 5% of your budget on this, of your defense budget on this, you are getting an incredible return on investment. And so, allied nations such as the US, the UK, the EU need to be sticking this out in for the long haul to support Ukraine, because you did that before, and I can't be sure that you would have got as much return on investment from the Cold War, which took decades and decades and decades, as you're getting from this war in Ukraine, which is a mere year and a half. Now, that sounds like an awful long time, but as far as wars go, you've got Afghanistan for the Soviet Union. You look at, other longer wars. A year and a half is we think that wars start and end really quickly. The whole length of war is quick because we're looking at some of these wars that happened, whether it be kind of in Nicaragua, Latin America, places where America have gone in and come out really quickly, and they got to thinking that, oh, yeah, we can do wars really quickly. So this one in Ukraine will be, that'll be a year, job done, no worries. No, that's not really the reality. So I think that Petr Pavel is somewhat correct here. Like, things have changed in the war, as in momentum has shifted possibly, but then that is what happens when you get a culmination and the other side has a go, and then they culminate and then you have a go. But I think Ukraine are in a much better position than they were. I'm much more positive, I think, than Pavel is here. But perhaps he's trying to scare people into giving more support for longer. And I think it is really important to understand that this won't necessarily be a quick war. It already isn't a quick war, and it's not looking like it's going anywhere soon for the next, I don't know how long. But it's just as important now that allies keep their support up and even augment their support. So Russia, and perhaps, my position of being a little bit more positive than Pavel here is warranted, because there are claims, this is next to saying that Russia wants talks with Ukraine. According to Putin's aide Ushakov, Kyiv has not been in contact with Moscow for several months now. Quote, Russia is ready for talks with Ukraine, but there have been no hints of new contacts with the Russian Federation from the Ukrainian side in recent months. At the same time, Russia has previously repeatedly said it was ready for negotiations with Ukraine, but only on the basis of recognizing the occupied territories. Whether they are now ready to do talks with Ukraine that are a little bit, that show that they've moved a little bit on those strong demands, I don't know. But it's worth remembering, because I've been involved in some of these arguments recently where people have been claiming, pro-Kremlin voices have been claiming that, you know what, Russians were up for doing a peace deal, but it was ignored by the Ukrainians and so on. The really common talking points that you hear from pro-Kremlin voices. We need to be cognizant of the form Russia has in this area. So as Jakub Perezinski here says, I believe the kids would say he brought receipts. So Dmitry Kuleba, the foreign minister for the Ukrainians, says, to those with short memories, between 2014 and 2022, Ukraine held about 200 rounds of talks with Russia. During this period, 20 ceasefire agreements were reached, all of which were quickly violated by Russia. None of the 200 rounds of talks or the 20 ceasefires have prevented Putin from launching a brutal all-out invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022. Those who argue that Ukraine should negotiate with Russia now are either uninformed or misled, or they side with Russia and want Putin to take a pause before an even larger aggression. We should not and will not fall into this trap. Absolutely. And Darth Putin, the kind of parody account that I think is absolutely brilliant and always on point. On this day in 1999, the OSCE conference was in Istanbul. Go back to 1999. Russia promised to remove our troops, he said, pretending to be, Russian Putin, our troops from Moldova and Georgia by the end of 2002. Ukraine should believe Russia's promises and negotiate, he says, tongue firmly in cheek. So, in November 1999, members of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe convened in Istanbul. One of the most noteworthy provisions of the document signed by the heads of state at the summit was a commitment by the Russian Federation to withdraw its troops and military equipment from Moldova. Have they done that? Transnistria, anyone? No, they haven't. And Georgia, have they done that? South Ossetia, you've got areas of Georgia that are still occupied by Russia. By the 31st of December 2002, Russia lie. They don't hold true to their word. And so, if you're going on form, I'm not going to back a horse that's lost repeatedly. And just another random bit of other news. It's not particularly news, but some have claimed this is a BMP-1 crossing the Dnipro River. As claimed it's Dnipro River and it's recent, but I'm not so sure about that. Might not be so sure about that myself. However, I have to say, like I've said to you before, I would not trust being in a Soviet era amphibious infantry fighting vehicle going across a river where the water is coming over the front of the vehicle. I'll be like, yeah, no, I'll take the dinghy, guys. You guys go Nat. Especially being underneath. Who would want to be down below in the hull of that thing? Goodness me. Anyway, it could be that the Ukrainians are pulling these vehicles across on their own, under their own power, across the Dnipro, and that would be super useful. There is generally fairly good news coming out of that area for the Ukrainians, although I haven't heard too much recently. I'll be looking into my frontline update soon. Anyway, that's enough for the first part today. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. Thank you. And all the ways you can support the channel are below. Buy me a coffee, PayPal, a membership, all that stuff. Honestly, truly appreciated, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to do this. But in the meantime, take care and I'll speak to you soon.